Hello and welcome in what should hopefully be another exciting episode of Westfox. I'm your humble host, and thank you for joining. So today we're going to talk about a large problem inside of the Hollywood/movie space, and it is prequel-itis, and its related problem of acute Lorcanium syndrome. So the problem that we're seeing now is that we continue to take long-standing properties and go back and make changes to it. What we're seeing happen is properties that were developed and started in the 60s, 70s, 80s are being brought forward, and throughout time they were, every iteration generally moved forward in time. You look at Star Trek specifically, we're time addressing today, where you had, original series, Next Generation, Voyager, and then Deep Space Nine and Voyager and a little bit of Intergeneration kind of took place in a similar time frame. But what the problem is, and you're seeing, this quote, and what prompted this discussion is this quote from October 2018 by Alex Kurtzman. Alex Kurtzman, who's the current showrunner of Star Trek. And when you start breaking it down, there's a lot of kind of scapegoating in it. And I think it kind of misleads the problem with what it goes. So we'll start from the beginning here. Everybody is always trying to maintain continuity. But given the 50 years plus of Star Trek, it's literally impossible because people decide that they want to follow a character in a book series after the show has been canceled, and so they'll invent stories. Now, this is true. There are books that are written and other material, supplemental material to the original shows. That is true. And then 15 years later, a new show come out, and they'll take the character back, and you can't be consistent with everything. Our goal is to try to always to try and never to negate what exists in the novels and graphic novels, but this is literally impossible. So the problem with this statement again is what we're talking about is the continuously having to go back to these characters. That right there is, we need to go back and reinvent the character. We need to go back and do a prequel. Because prequels are, there's times they can be good, but that number of positive prequels I think at this point is very, very small. I can't even think of one on top of my head, to be honest. You look at even really probably well-crafted ones, or at least put the work into it. Something like Monsters Incorporated, and then Monsters University, which is the prequel to it, and some of the issues with the canon and lore and that, where the characters seem to have met up before they should have, and et cetera, et cetera. And whenever in real life, things go forward and in progress, and so any complexities you can always trace them down to real world incidences. However, in storytelling, obviously, you're able to rewrite, adjust, and sometimes the implications of things you do at one point have larger, far-reaching problems. And you're seeing this in so many of these prequel things. You have Star Trek Discovery, where they're going back prior to the original series and then bringing original series characters into it, which then force whatever you do in that movie, if you change things, that would have larger lasting effects. Now, the problem I think too you're seeing is they're saying, if you're trying to map every single element of, different authors, that it does make it quite difficult. But again, I think that most people would forgive, especially when it comes to novels and supplementary material, if the heart of the material is still there. And I think what's missing in a lot of the stuff nowadays is you're losing the heart of the material when they're putting it together. And they're not doing the imagination. So the next part here, and the part of what kept going for so long is everyone's wonderful imagination and keep writing books and making graphic novels and keep making shows. And at a certain point, given the volume of things that are out there, it's impossible for everyone to sync up perfectly. So we give it our best effort. Now, I honestly don't believe that last part about the best effort. I think it's been shown that they have no desire to actually follow in sense of what the show has had before. Now, you can take elements and make changes. And again, I am very anti going back and continuously doing prequel stories. I know there's talk of a Pike series, and I think this is another example. Why do we keep going backwards? Why can't we go forward? The Star Trek Picard was the first version of a show that we've seen go forward in Star Trek in almost 20 years. And it was not great. And the problem is, what's happening here is you're not being faithful to the material that comes before. So that's kind of the two part of it, right? So if you're going, you can't go backwards and go, I need the changes to make this work, and you can't not respect the previous thing. So if you don't want to respect any of that stuff, just go out and make your own story. That's fine. Then you can go, critique it based upon these credits of being a good or bad story. The problem is that we're seeing now is writers and storytellers come in and give a generic story. They throw a Star Trek skin on it without really taking into consequences of previous stuff. A great example was in The Last Jedi, where there's the hyperspace jump, essentially the hyperspace ramming jump, where in the show you go, cool, that was a really cool moment visually, it was very, very cool, but then you go, wait a second, now previous things don't make sense. Why was this never used before, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously in The Rise of Skywalker, they try to explain it, go, oh, it was once in a million chance type stuff. And that obviously goes, okay, well then why wasn't no one even try to weaponize that? Because once in a million, you go, well, you shoot a million ships at something, maybe you'll have a chance. So if it's that destructive. So I think you continuously see that whatever choices you make, especially in prequels, need to line up with what happens in the future. And if you're making choices in the present, you can't just change what happened in the past. And I think we're continuing to see this kind of disrespect to both sides of it. And again, they claim that, oh, we care, we're trying. You're like, no, you can't keep saying that when you specifically say things like, oh, we want to cause chaos with the fan base. And again, I don't really understand that motivation. I think a lot of times it comes from people who don't watch or read the material. Because I think, again, most people, obviously some people that are going to be more stringent on it, but I believe most people will accept a slight faux pas. They've tried to explain, great example of in Star Trek would be the Klingons' ridges. And in TNG, they just kind of went, we don't speak of that. And, I think somewhere, I forget, I think Enterprise discussed a bit. I'm not as familiar with Enterprise much. I didn't really enjoy that show too much either. Again, a prequel. But I believe that, there are going to be times that something that you did before won't always perfectly line up. But I think the problem is that we're using these, what would be considered small problems of like, oh, was this ship there or there versus, storytelling characters. You can't essentially kill a character and be like, oh, they're back, or completely rewrite a character's history, or change who they are on such a dramatic level that they're no longer the same person. Because again, at the point where why don't you just put them as just bring a new character in? And so I think that's why people are getting irritated with what they're doing. Isn't because of a simple, continuity error here and there. It's a complete disregard for previous stories, and in some cases, going back and changing the future stories. So I think that's just the beginning of what you're seeing with this kind of, acute Lord Canon syndrome, where you're seeing things not accurately be created to what they are. And the deeper you go down these story arcs, it gets the more complex it is. And again, that's why I'm a huge advocate just moving forward with the stories. I would love to see Star Trek move forward 100 years. And then you're not stuck with trying to, every choice you make needs to be a complete difference, because you can have new characters, you can have events that take place and have longer tail effects versus something that took place 5 years ago and be, oh, it completely changed the fundamentals of the Federation, or, this character is now this way. And you're like, well, just make a new character that you can allow to have a story arc. Because I think that you're seeing sometimes these characters that have had multi-year story arcs, they're just resetting them again. That's, you're seeing that with kind of like characters like Seven, even Picard, where they have conversations of like, oh, home, and do I care about these friends? And you're like, I feel like within the seasons of both Voyager and Next Generation, that these kind of topics were avidly covered. So I think that what we need to see moving forward with this stuff, again, is respect of the material that came before. And I don't think we're seeing that respect. And I don't think there's any desire to do that. So I think until people come into and run these shows that not only want to move forward with the show and take risks. I mean, it is okay to take risks and push new ideas and to do things that are new. In general, I actually liked the idea of a 10 episode run of Picard where it was one larger story. I don't have a problem with that at all. Actually, in fact, I think that one of the weaker points of Star Trek, especially later stuff like Voyager, or D69, was, well, Voyager too, because Voyager was always coming towards Earth, but was that they never, events would happen in previous episode and they kind of just forget about it. There were certain technologies that would be brought up, like isokinetic cannon, and they would just be like, oh, we're never touching that again. Now, granted, some things were brought back, like slipstream and things, but that was, I think they were just on the edge of kind of more long, weaving threads that last a little longer than 1 or 2 episodes. So I think that my initial thought when they were announcing some of the show stuff was, okay, this could be really good because you can tell a more complicated story. You can really push your character arcs in really interesting ways. And again, sometimes a one single thread doesn't mean it has to be the day of. Like the show 24 was an example of this, where it's like, okay, 24 episodes all happen within a 24-hour period. I think it's okay sometimes to have a little breathing inside the season even, using an example like The Witcher, where it's all part of one story. It's being woven, but not every event takes place in the same couple days. And I think that's where, the story structure in this one, they could have done some things like that, allowed some pacing to happen, allowed things to happen, and allowed it to kind of, stew, allow the story to stew. Even inside the story, when we were reviewing the show, we're like, well, why wasn't this element brought back a long time ago? This should have been talked about earlier in the story, or this element could have been scrapped. We'll get into that more in a full review. But these are the elements that I believe that could be helped when it came to the story. And again, I kind of throw a little bit of doubt on this, 50 years. This is a show that's been off and on again for a lot of time. So 50 years is not, 50 years of non-stop shows going. You had the original series was only, a handful of episodes relatively compared to some of the new shows nowadays. And then you have, TNG, you have Voyager and Deep Space Nine, and then you have Enterprise. And there was a huge period of time, where there was no Star Trek. So I think that you're over-scoping it and over-building the challenge on it. And again, I think that said people, if they took just the basic critique of things that are like, okay, does this event make sense in the grand scale of what Star Trek is? You would see people be a lot more open to it. Again, things like this, the idea of a darker storyline, I don't actually hate that. I think that could be very interesting. I think it's when you're taking characters that are well developed throughout time and trying to put them into the dark and edgy storytelling just doesn't work. You look at like what they did with 7/9, etc. And then the other element of that is, do we want like a dark? To me, a good dark story has those shades of light that come through, that contrast of the light and the dark, those moments of the chaos, and then there's that slight order into it. But a lot of times I feel like the current shows, or when I hear that, I feel it's going to go down the road of something like even darker, edgier Game of Thrones, where it's just murder, death, swear words, and again, really a non-coherent story with it. I've heard rumors, or I think they're trying to put together a Section 31 show. And to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Section 31. I don't really know why people would think it's such a cool thing. If you like it, that's cool, But I think that the idea that there's a black ops in the Federation kind of takes away from what the Federation is. And I guess that it could be a level of intelligence on it that it does make sense that have higher security, especially when you deal with an organization like Tel Shiar, which obviously Section 31 was doing a terrible job. If you look at what happened in the events in Picard, they obviously are, I would expect, dismantled at this point. I don't know how they could let what's happened in that show happen if they exist on any level. But the idea of, futuristic spies could be interesting inside the Star Trek universe, but it needs to be written beyond the point of, it's just people murdering each other and, gray morals, or, everything is a gray moral. I think sometimes what makes those kind of stories interesting is when you put characters who want to be good and who want to do the right thing into situations where there's not an easy out. And I don't see them writing that way. Because again, look at the end of Picard even. They were allowed a super easy out on that. And it wasn't really forcing them into a spot where they had to make choices on it. It was like, oh, don't push the button. Cool, we're good to go. You look at shows that had more thoughtful type elements like Doctor Who in the 50th anniversary episode, where it's dealing with the similar type of reverse, but, protect the universe or push the button type stuff. And or push the button, protect the universe type stuff. And is there another option? And, those had a thought provoking and, somewhat convoluted in some ways episode, but it was thought, you thought about it and you felt the characters thinking about it. I don't feel that these characters really think about the actions and the implications of it. And I think that's why for a lot of people, this show doesn't ring true. And I think that's why a lot of the writing in these shows doesn't ring true, is you don't put characters in situations that have depth and meaning to the character, and these characters aren't established enough in a way that you go, oh, okay, I can see where you're coming from. I can see why you are what you are. And so when you take characters that we do know why they are how they are, and you put them in situations where it doesn't really add up what their actions are, you go, that doesn't really work. And so I think the best thing, again, I really love Star Trek, and I would like to see them move forward with positive shows. Again, I see them focusing more on this, like I said, prequel stuff. I stop the prequels, because every time you do it, yes, you do make it convoluted. You do make it, tricky. It's like trying to rebuild if you ever built like a piece of IKEA type furniture, build a home furniture, and you forget a piece and you mess it up. So you have to go back and completely undo it. And I feel like that they keep doing that because it's almost impossible to reinsert a piece that you missed. And so when you're telling these stories, they keep adding pieces that they, need to make it work, or just doesn't fit. And so you end up with this like lopsided, weird furniture. And then you're told, oh, it's okay. And you're like, but it's not. And it continues not to be, it takes away from the entertainment of it. Granted, some people can just, they don't care about that kind of thing. And they don't pay attention enough to this, they're not really into the lore, the deeper storytelling stuff, and that's totally okay. But I think that if you're trying to attract the fan base and people who really want to enjoy it, I think you need to go and keep true to what the universe is that is Star Trek. Now, I think the other thing too is, do we really need another dystopian future? I think that in the current times that we live in, I think just the times in general, the dystopian future is very well played out. And not to say there can be any new material that can be really good with it, but in general, I think that we've had so many mediums or shows and TV shows that portray that dystopian future, and so few that have kind of a positive outlook. What is the, end goal of, positive civilization, that kind of stuff. And so that's what Star Trek always seemed like it was, always was going towards. And not that there would not be conflict, but that it came from a more thought-provoking way versus the kind of Twitter feel that the episodes have, where it's just characters telling each other to F off. And I think that is what's unfortunate with this. And so I think for me, the best thing they could do would be go 60, 70 years, 80 years, 100 years in the future in the Star Trek universe, and start exploring new type of things that really push the boundaries of the show. Granted, we know that visual effects are different now, so some of the things aren't going to make sense, right? So you have these displays that come up and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that, you could take interesting ideas that from what we know technology and put those into stories as, with other races and other, civilizations, and explore more. And I don't think that's what's going to happen. So anyway, that's my initial thoughts of kind of a breakdown of why I think that prequels in the Star Trek universe continue to be lacking, because the people who work on them don't really care about canon. So I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.